The sun was dipping low over the alien marketplace, painting the dusty streets in shades of gold and red. Ethan had only come here to trade for supplies, food, water, and maybe a few spare parts for his ship. The air was thick with strange smells. Roasted meats from creatures he could not name, the sharp scent of alien spices, and the faint metallic temps of the city's ancient metal walls. Merchants shouted in a dozen languages, each one trying to get the attention of passing customers. It was loud, busy, and crowded, just the way Ethan liked it, because in a place like this, a man could disappear. He was halfway down the main street when it happened. A small, trembling hand grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Ethan looked down and saw her, a young alien girl with pale green skin and silver eyes that glowed faintly in the fading light. Her clothes were torn, her hair was messy, and her breathing was fast. She looked terrified. "Mighty human, please," she said in a shaky voice. "My sister's been taken, help me get her back." For a second, Ethan just stared at her. He had been called many things before, but mighty human was new. Around them, the noise of the market seemed to fade. People glanced at the girl, then quickly looked away, muttering to themselves. No one stepped forward, no one offered help. It was like they didn't want to get involved. Ethan knelt so he was closer to her eye level. "What happened?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. The girl's eyes filled with tears. They came from the canyon. She said, "Men with masks, the Bone Hand clan. They took my sister Syrah. They said she was worth a good price." Her small fists clenched as she spoke. "I tried to follow them, but they hit me. They said if I came after them again, I'd be next." Ethan noticed the bruise on her wrist, deep purple against her green skin. He also saw how thin she was, as if she hadn't eaten much in days. The people of the market still avoided looking at her. It was clear no one here would help, and the girl Lyra, she said her name was Nuet. The Bone Hand clan, Ethan thought. He had heard of them before. Slavers, raiders, killers. They took whoever they wanted, once someone was in there. Hands, they were usually gone forever. He knew what getting involved meant. It meant risking his life, his ship, maybe even more. Where did they take her? He asked finally. Lyra's silver eyes lit up with a mix of hope and fear. "They went to the dark canyons," she said. "No one goes there. Except them." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The rocks there. They listen, they move. People say the place is alive." Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the sky darkened over a jagged line of black cliffs. He could almost feel the heat of the sun disappearing behind them. It was the kind of place you avoided unless you had no choice. And right now, it sounded like Lyra had no choice. The question was, did he? He thought of walking away. It wasn't his fight. But something about the desperation in her voice, the way her small hand still clung to his sleeve, made him stop. There was no one else, no one willing to try, and he had been in her position. Once alone, scared, and with no one to help, Ethan stood, his decision made, lead the way. He said. Lyra blinked, almost not believing what she'd heard. "You mean, you'll help?" "Yes," Ethan said simply, "but you'll have to keep up. And you'll have to do exactly what I say." Her lips trembled, and for a moment she looked like she might cry again. Instead, she straightened her back, nodded, and said, "I will." Then, she glanced toward the edge of the market. "You don't know what's out there," she whispered. Ethan gave her a small, grim smile. "Maybe not," he said, "but I'm about to find out." They moved quickly, slipping out of the market before anyone could stop them. The streets grew quieter as they headed toward the cliffs. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the sounds of the marketplace faded behind them. Ahead, the jagged black walls of the dark canyons loomed larger with every step. A cold wind blew from between the cliffs, carrying with it the smell of stone and something older, something dangerous. "Lyra," kept glancing over her shoulder. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was thinking about what they might find inside those canyons raiders' traps, and worse, but his mind was already set. "We get your sister back," he said finally. "That's all that matters." As they reached the base of the cliffs, the last light of the sun faded completely. The entrance to the canyon yawned before them like the open mouth of some massive beast. Ethan took a deep breath. Somewhere in there, a girl was waiting for help. And he had promised to bring her home. "Stay close," he told Lyra, stepping into the darkness. The shadows swallowed them both, and the hunt began. The canyon swallowed them whole, the light of the marketplace fading behind until it was only a distant glow. Here, the air was colder, sharper, and it carried an eerie silence that pressed on the ears. Ethan walked ahead, his boots crunching over loose gravel, while Lyra followed close behind, her silver eyes darting into the shadows every few steps. A faint echo would bounce back at them, not the echo of their own footsteps, but something heavier, slower, moving somewhere deeper inside. The walls of the canyon were jagged, black, stone rising high above like giant teeth. Some had strange markings carved into them, old symbols worn by time. Lyra touched one lightly as they passed. Whispering words in her own language, Ethan didn't ask what it meant, but he guessed it. With some kind of protection prayer, the wind whistled through narrow cracks, carrying a low, moaning sound that could almost be mistaken for voices. "You said the Bone Hand clan came this way," Ethan said quietly. "They always do," Lyra replied. "The canyon hides their tracks. No one dares follow." Her voice shook slightly, but she kept moving. "They take people to sell them in the markets across the desert, or worse." Her words trailed off, but Ethan didn't push her to finish. He had seen enough slavers in his time to know what worse meant. They rounded a bend where the path narrowed until only one person could pass at a time. The ground here was slick, with a strange black moss above. Something scurried across the rocks, quick, silent, and gone in an instant. Lyra froze, clutching Ethan's sleeve. "What was that?" she whispered. "Don't know," Ethan answered. "Let's keep moving." The deeper they went, the more the walls closed in. It felt like the canyon itself was alive, watching, listening. Once, Ethan thought he heard a Lafa cruel, mocking sound carried on the wind, but when he stopped to listen, there was nothing. Lyra noticed his pause and said, "The old ones say the canyon remembers every scream." Ethan didn't believe in curses, but something about this place made his skin crawl. After what felt like hours, they came to a fork. In the path, one way sloped downward into a tunnel so dark it looked like solid black. The other led upward toward a narrow ridge with a faint blue glow at its end. "Which way?" Ethan asked. "The Bonehand camp is down there." Lyra pointed to the darkness. "But we can't go straight in, they have watchers." She gestured toward the glowing path. "That way leads to the cliff above their camp. We can see them before they see us." They took the ridge, climbing carefully over loose stones and sharp edges. At one point, a rock gave way under Lyra's foot, and she stumbled. He then caught her before she fell, pulling her back to safety. "Careful," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. She nodded quickly, embarrassed. Her small hands gripped the rock tighter after that. And she didn't stumble again. Halfway up, Ethan spotted movement below, a group of masked figures walking single file along the lower path. Even from here, he could see the bone-white paint on their hands and the black cloth covering their faces. Each one carried a weapon, some crude, but deadly. One of them was dragging a cage on wheels, the metal rattling against the stone. Inside, something moved. Ethan thought it might be another prisoner. He felt his jaw tighten. "Your sister could be in that camp right now," he said. Lyra's voice was almost a whisper. "She is, I know it," The higher they climbed, the stronger the blue glow became when they finally reached the top of the ridge. Ethan saw its source, an alien plant, its petals glowing like cold fire, growing in clusters along the cliff's edge. They gave just enough light to see the drop below, and there it was, the Bone Hand camp, spread across a wide, flat space hidden deep in the canyon. Fires burned in iron pits, sending trails of smoke into the night. Figures moved around them, some sitting and eating, others sharpening blades. Near the center, several cages stood in a row, each holding captives. Ethan scanned them quickly, and then Lyra gasped, clutching his arm. "There?" she whispered fiercely. "That's Syrah." Ethan followed her gaze and saw a taller alien girl in one of the cages. Her green skin a paler shade than Lyra's, her head bowed in exhaustion. Even from this distance, Ethan could see the dried blood on her arm. Lyra's voice shook. "We have to get her now." "Not yet," Ethan said firmly. "We can't rush in, there's too many of them." He crouched low, studying the camp. The guards walked a pattern to circling the cages. 3 more near the fires, and at least 4 on the edges, watching the shadows. "They're expecting trouble," Ethan murmured. "They're always ready," Lyra replied. "They've been in these canyons for years." Ethan looked around, searching for anything that could give them an advantage. Nearby, an abandoned pack lay wedged between 2 rocks. Inside, he found rope, hooks, and a few strange metal tools. He smiled faintly. Tools meant for climbing could also be used for something else. A plan was already forming in his mind. "We wait until night is deep," he told Lyra. "When they're tired, when their guards start to slack. And then?" she asked. "Then," Ethan said, "we take your sister back, far below." The Bone Hand clan laughed around their fires, unaware that a human was watching from above. The cold wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and sweat. The hunt was far from over, and Ethan knew the hardest part was still ahead. The night deepened over the dark canyons, the fires of the Bone Hand clan flickering below like the eyes of some great beast. Ethan and Lyra lay flat on the ridge, the cold stone pressing against their chests. From here, every sound from the camp carried upward, the clatter of metal, the rough laughter of raiders, the low moans of captives. Ethan studied every detail, his eyes tracing the paths of the guards and the places where shadows swallowed the light. He was building the map in his head, a map that could mean the difference between rescue and death. Lyra barely moved, afraid that even the smallest sound might draw eyes upward. Her silver gaze never left the cage where her sister sat slumped against the bars. Syrah's movements were slow, her head tilting forward every so often, as if she were drifting in and out of consciousness. "She's hurt," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. "If we wait too long," Ethan cut her off gently. "If we rush in, we don't get out at all." He pointed toward the far side of the camp. 2 raiders stood there, their backs to the main fires, watching the darkness. If Ethan could distract them, maybe the shadows on that side might be enough to slip past. Near the cages, a single guard sat on an overturned crate, a weapon across his knees, his head turning lazily, as if he wasn't truly paying attention. Still, even one alert guard could ruin everything. Ethan scanned the camp for anything he could use. That's when he noticed the supply area cluster of crates and sacks piled near the largest fire. If something there went up in flames, it might pull every raider's attention for just long enough. "Supplies," Ethan murmured. "More." To himself than to Lyra, she gave him a confused look. "What?" "Nothing," he said, just thinking they stayed on the ridge for nearly an hour. Ethan memorizing the guard patterns until they repeated like clockwork. Lyra's breathing grew shallow, her hands gripping the rock so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Finally, Ethan sat back, pulling the small pack they'd found earlier toward him. Inside, the rope and hooks could be tied together into a makeshift climbing line. The strange metal tools, thin, flat, and sharp, could be used to pick the cage lock. If they were lucky, we'll go down here. Ethan pointed to a narrow path leading along the cliffside. It's steep, but it brings us close to the cages without crossing the open ground, and the guards. Lyra asked. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the supply area again. I'll handle that. The plan was simple. But simple plans had the best chance of working. They would descend, move in the shadows along the cliff, take out the cage guard quietly, free Sarah, and get out before the raiders knew what was happening. If things went wrong, well, Ethan didn't let himself think too long about that part. They waited until the laughter in the camp grew louder. The fires lower. Down below, one of the raiders passed a jug to another, their shouts turning slurred. It was the sign Ethan had been waiting for. He signaled to Lyra, and they began their descent. The cliffside path was narrow, just wide enough for 1 foot at a time. Loose stones tumbled down into the darkness. But the sound was lost in the noise of the camp. Ethan moved first, Lyra following so closely she could almost touch his back. Her breath came fast, but she didn't complain. When they reached the bottom, the smell of smoke and sweat hit them. Hard, they pressed against the cliff wall, the shadows hiding them as they edged closer to the cages. From here, Ethan could see Sierra's face more clearly, her eyes half closed. Her skin pale, Lyra's lips tightened, but she didn't call out. The guard on the crate shifted. Yawning, Ethan waited, his body tense, until the guard's head tilted slightly forward. That was when Ethan moved. Silent steps carried him behind the guard, his arm wrapping around the man's throat. The struggle was short, the guard collapsing. Quietly to the ground, Ethan lowered him gently so the sound wouldn't carry. Lyra's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Ethan knelt at the cage, pulling one of the thin metal tools from his belt. The lock was crude, but strong. He worked quickly, every second stretching into what felt like minutes. Finally, the lock clicked, the door swinging open with a faint squeal. Sierra's eyes flickered open, confusion mixing with relief. Lyra, she whispered, her voice raw. Lyra rushed forward. Wrapping her arms around her sister, Ethan's attention stayed on the camp. No one had noticed yet. But that wouldn't last. He helped Sierra to her feet, but she was weak to walk on her own. Without hesitation, Ethan crouched and lifted her onto his back. Her weight was light, but it made him slower. Stay close, he told Lyra. She nodded, glancing around nervously. They began moving back toward the cliffside path. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually make it. Then, a voice shouted from the other side of the camp. A guard was pointing directly at them. Torches flared, weapons were grabbed, and the quiet of the night exploded into chaos. Run, Ethan barked, and the chase began. Asterisk. The quiet shadows that had once been their shield now shattered under the roar of voices. Ethan felt the weight of Sierra on his back as he ran, his boots pounding against the canyon floor. Lyra sprinted beside him, her small hands clutching the edge of his jacket as if afraid he might vanish into the darkness. Behind them, the camp came alive, raiders shouting, weapons clanging, boots thundering across the rocky ground. Torches blazed, their flickering light chasing away the safety of the night. The Bonehand clan poured from between tents and fires, their masks gleaming bone-white under the flames. A bolt of blue plasma shot past Ethan's head, hitting the cliffside with a flash and a shower of sparks. The heat brushed his cheek, but he didn't slow. Faster, he shouted, his voice tight with urgency. They reached the narrow path that led up the cliff. Ethan grabbed the rope he had left dangling earlier, looping it around his arm as he began to climb. It was harder with Sierra's weight, her weak arms barely holding on around his shoulders. Lyra scrambled behind him, her breath coming in quick. Sharp gasps, the sound of boots grew closer, the voices of the raiders echoing off the canyon walls. Halfway up, a sharp crack split the air. A crossbow bolt buried itself in the rock, just inches from Ethan's hand. Another one clattered against the cliff above him. He gritted his teeth, hauling himself higher. The rope swayed with every movement, threatening to throw him off balance. Ethan. Lyra's voice rose in alarm. He risked a glance down to raiders were already climbing after them, their bone-painted hands gripping the rock like claws. One had a long, curved blade strapped to his back. The other carried a hook meant for dragging prey. Ethan's mind raced. If they reached him before he got to the top, they'd all be pulled down. He reached for the small pouch at his belt. Pulling out a flat metal spike, with one quick motion, he jammed it into the rock face and kicked the rope hard. The sudden swing sent the lower raider smashing into the wall. His grip slipping, he fell with a scream that echoed into the darkness. Below, the second one hesitated, snarling through his mask, but kept climbing. Lyra, seeing him closing in, did something Ethan didn't expect. She reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled out a small, jagged shard of glowing crystal. With a sharp cry, she threw it down. It struck the rock near the raider's head, shattering into a blinding flash of light. The man cursed and lost his hold. Tumbling into the shadows after his companion, they didn't stop to watch. Ethan pushed upward until his hands grasped the top edge of the cliff. With a final pull, he dragged himself and Sira over the ledge, collapsing onto the cold stone. Lyra scrambled up after him, falling to her knees as she gasped for air, but there was no time to rest. Below, the camp roared in fury, torches and lights moving like a swarm. More raiders would be coming, and fast. Ethan got to his feet, shifting Sira's weight on his back. "This way," he said. Leading them into the deeper shadows along the ridge, the path curved sharply, hugging the cliff before dropping into a series of narrow rock corridors. It was the route Ethan had chosen earlier, twisting path that would hide them from view. But the Bone Hand knew these canyons as well as anyone. Their shouts began to echo from more than one direction. "They're circling us," Lyra warned. Fear creeping into her voice, Ethan's eyes darted across the jagged terrain. There a narrow crevice between two massive boulders, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. He guided Lyra toward it, pulling Sira with him, inside. The walls pressed so close together that their shoulders scraped against the stone. The darkness swallowed them whole, the noise of the pursuit. Muffled by the rock, they moved in silence for several minutes, their footsteps soft on the sandy ground. Sira's breathing was shallow, but steady. Lyra reached back once to squeeze her sister's hand, and Ethan saw the faintest smile on her face, despite the danger. They emerged from the crevice into a wider space, a hidden hollow in the cliffside, shielded from above by overhanging stone. Here, Ethan finally lowered Sira to the ground. She leaned against the rock, her eyes half-lidded. "You came for me," she murmured, her voice weak but full of emotion. Lyra knelt beside her, tears glistening in her silver eyes. "Always," she whispered. Ethan stood at the entrance of the hollow, watching the canyon beyond. Faint lights moved. In the distance, the Bonehand search parties, their torches weaving like fireflies in the dark. He knew they didn't have long before those lights got closer. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Rest for 2 minutes," Ethan said quietly. "Then we move again." Lyra looked up at him. "You're not going to leave us?" He shook his head, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Not a chance," he said. "We finish this together." Far away, a howl echoed through the canyons. It wasn't human, and it wasn't the Bone Hand. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Whatever was out there, they'd have to deal with it too. The night in the dark canyons was only getting started. The faint rest they'd stolen in the hollow vanished as soon as the first sound reached Ethan's ears. It was a distant rhythm at first, boots against stone, voices carried by the wind, but with each heartbeat, it grew louder, closer. The Bone Hand clan was on the move, and they were coming fast. Ethan tightened the straps of his pack. Adjusting Syrah's weight on his back, she was still too weak to walk far. Her head resting against his shoulder, Lyra stood ready beside him, her silver eyes scanning the canyon's shadows. "They're splitting up," she said in a low voice. "I hear them from more than one path." Ethan nodded, his mind already mapping routes through the jagged terrain. "Follow me and stay quiet," he ordered. The three of them slipped from the hollow into the twisting rock corridors beyond. Here, the walls rose high, and the path wound like a snake between sharp boulders. The darkness was heavy, broken only by the faint light of alien plants clinging to the stone. Their glow a cold blue. For a while, their footsteps were the only sound, then shouts, "Close." Now, the rough voices of the bone hand echoing off the walls. A torchlight flickered ahead, growing brighter. Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her into a side passage. They pressed themselves against the stone as two masked raiders jogged past, their weapons glinting in the torchlight. When the glow faded, Ethan signaled to move again. But they hadn't gone far before another shout rang out behind them. This one was louder, sharper. "They've seen us," Ethan said grimly. The chase exploded into motion. Ethan ran, his boots pounding over the uneven ground. Lyra sprinted beside him, glancing over her shoulder to see torchlight bouncing wildly. As the raiders closed in, a plasma bolt sizzled past her head, striking the wall and showering them with sparks. She stumbled, but Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her forward, never slowing. They rounded a sharp bend, and the ground dropped away into a steep slope of loose gravel. Without hesitation, Ethan pushed forward, sliding down the incline in a controlled fall. Lyra followed, her small frame moving fast. The sound of pursuit echoed above as the bone hand reached the top of the slope. Rocks tumbled under their boots as they began to descend. At the bottom, the canyon widened into a natural floor of cracked stone. Golly. Ethan scanned the walls quickly. There were 3 exits, all narrow, all dangerous. He chose the one farthest to the left, a jagged passage half hidden by fallen rock. They darted into it just as the first of the raiders hit the canyon floor behind them. The new path was tighter, the air colder. Every sound seemed to bounce off the walls and multiply. Syrah stirred on Ethan's back, mumbling something he couldn't make out. "We're almost there," he whispered, though he didn't know if she could hear him. Up ahead, the passage split again. One way sloped upward, the other downward into deeper shadow. Ethan hesitated only for a moment before taking the downward path. Up meant open ground where the bone hand could see them from above. Down meant more cover, even if it brought new dangers. The walls here were wet, slick with a thin layer of moss. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped in a slow, steady rhythm. Lyra's breathing was loud in the silence. "They're still behind us," she said. Ethan knew he could hear the faint scrape of boots on stone. Closer than before, they reached a section where the path narrowed to a crawl space. Ethan dropped to his knees, maneuvering Syrah carefully as he pushed forward. Lyra slipped through behind him, glancing back nervously. The sounds of pursuit were louder now. One wrong move, and the raiders would be on them. When they emerged from the crawl space, Ethan saw a glimmer of pale light ahead. It wasn't the cold blue of the plants, it was softer, warmer. They stepped into a small, hidden grotto where the ceiling opened to the night sky. Stars shone above, and a faint breeze stirred the air. For the first time in hours, Ethan felt the tension in his chest ease slightly. But the relief lasted only seconds. A bone-handled spear whistled through the air, striking the ground at his feet. 3 masked figures stepped from the shadows at the far side of the grotto, blocking the only other exit. Their eyes glinted through their masks, weapons ready. Ethan set Syrah gently against the wall and stepped forward. "Stay behind me," he told Lyra, without looking back. The raiders spread out, circling. Ethan shifted his weight. ready to strike if one moved closer, but before the first blow could fall, a howl ripped through the grotto, a deep, otherworldly sound that froze everyone in place. From the shadows above, something massive moved, its shape blending with the rock until it leaped into the firelight of the raiders' torches. It wasn't Bonehand, and it wasn't human. It was a predator of the canyon, its long limbs ending in claws, its eyes glowing with a cold hunger. The raiders' attention broke instantly to turning their weapons toward the creature. Ethan didn't waste the chance. Now, he shouted to Lyra, grabbing Sierra and sprinting toward the exit while the beast crashed into their enemies. They slipped past the chaos, the sound of snarls and screams echoing behind them. Ethan didn't look back. He knew the creature would keep the Bonehand busy for a few minutes, but only a few, and when they came again, they'd be angrier than ever. The narrow passage twisted and turned, carrying them deeper into the heart of the canyon. The echoes of the fight between the Predator and the Bonehand clan faded behind them, replaced by the steady sound of their own breathing and hurried steps. Ethan could feel Sierra's shallow breaths against his neck. Her weight light but unsteady, Lyra kept pace beside him, her silver eyes darting to every shadow they had escaped for now. But the silence carried a warning. This wasn't over. They emerged into a wide open space beneath the jagged walls. The moonlight spilled down through a gap above, painting the ground in pale silver. Ethan stopped, setting Sierra gently against a boulder so she could rest. Lyra knelt beside her sister, brushing hair from her face. Sierra's lips moved, but her words were too soft to hear. Lyra looked up, worry written across her face. "She won't make it if we keep running all night," she whispered. Ethan's gaze shifted toward the path they'd come from. He knew she was right. The Bonehand wouldn't give up. And sooner or later, they'd catch up. If that happened while they were still on the move, they'd be cornered with nowhere to hide. They needed to stop running. They needed to end it here. He scanned the open space, his eyes searching for anything he could use. There were large boulders scattered around, narrow choke points between them, and loose rock piled high in some places. It wasn't perfect, but it could work. "We're not running anymore," Ethan said finally, his voice firm. Lyra stared at him. "You mean you're going to fight them?" "Yes," Ethan replied, "and you're going to help me?" They got to work quickly. Ethan gathered rocks and set them in small piles behind the boulders, places where he could force the raiders into narrow paths. He wedged loose stones high, up in cracks, ready to fall if struck. Lyra used the rope from his pack to set trip lines between the rocks, low enough to catch ankles. It wasn't much, but every second the Bonehand spent tangled or stumbling would give Ethan an advantage. Sierra watched them through half-lidded eyes. When Lyra returned to her side to check on her, Sierra's hand found her sister's. "You have to be careful," Sierra whispered weakly. "He's strong, but..." "So are they." Lyra squeezed her hand gently. "We'll be careful," she promised, though her own heart was pounding. The first sign of their arrival was the flicker of torchlight against the canyon walls. The Bonehand clan had regrouped, and their numbers hadn't thinned much. Ethan crouched low behind a boulder, his muscles tense. The sound of boots grew louder until masked figures began spilling into the open space. Weapons ready, the leader stepped forward, a towering figure with a curved blade and a mask painted with two long black streaks running down from the eyes. So the leader's voice was deep, echoing in the canyon. "The mighty human thinks he can take from us." Ethan rose from behind the boulder, his voice calm but sharp. "I'm not taking," he said. "I'm returning what you stole." The leader laughed, the sound harsh. "Then you'll die with them," he growled. The fight began in an instant. The first two raiders charged, but Ethan sidestepped, pushing one into the trip line Lyra had set. The man went down hard, his weapon clattering across the stone. The second swung at Ethan, but the human caught his wrist and twisted. forcing him to drop his blade before sending him sprawling. Another pair came from the left, but one of the loose rock piles collapsed under Ethan's strike, sending a cascade of stones onto them. They staggered, momentarily blinded. Lyra darted forward, grabbing one of their fallen weapons and swinging it clumsily but effectively to knock a raider back. She was breathing hard, fear in her eyes, but she didn't back down. The leader stepped in now, his curved blade flashing in the moonlight. Ethan met him head-on, steel clashing against steel. The man was strong, his strikes heavy enough to jar Ethan's arms, but Ethan fought with speed and precision, deflecting, countering, forcing the leader to adjust with every move. A sudden blow from the leader's boot caught Ethan in the ribs, sending him back a step. The raider swung again, the blade coming dangerously close. Ethan ducked, rolling to the side and grabbing a fallen weapon from the ground. Now armed with two blades, he pressed forward. The clash rang through the canyon, sparks flying with every strike. Lyra was fending off a smaller raider when she saw the leader gain the upper hand, forcing Ethan toward the edge of the open ground. Her eyes darted to the rope still in her hands. Acting without thinking, she darted behind the leader, looping the rope around his legs and pulling hard. The man stumbled, giving Ethan the opening he needed. With a swift, controlled strike, Ethan knocked the leader's blade from his hands and sent him crashing to the ground. The remaining bone hand hesitated, glancing at their fallen leader. Ethan's voice rang out, low and dangerous. "Leave now, and you live." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the raiders began to back away, disappearing into the shadows of the canyon. The leader, still on the ground, spat at the dirt but did not rise. When the last of them was gone, Ethan let out a long breath. Lyra ran to Syrah, dropping to her knees beside her sister. Syrah's tired smile was the first sign that maybe they'd made it through. Ethan sat on a rock, his shoulders aching, the weight of the night finally catching up to him. It wasn't over, but for now, they had won. The canyon was quiet now. The fires of the Bonehand clan had burned low, and the echoes of battle were gone. Only the soft whisper of the wind moved through the jagged stone walls. Ethan stood at the edge of the open ground, scanning the shadows, to make sure no one had stayed behind. When he was certain they were alone, he turned back to where Lyra knelt beside her sister. Syrah's head rested against the boulder, her breathing slow but steady. Lyra was holding her hand, speaking in a soft voice only Syrah could hear when she saw Ethan approach. Lyra's silver eyes shone in the moonlight. "She's alive," she said, her voice trembling with relief. "She's really alive." Ethan gave a small nod, a weight lifting from his chest. He crouched beside Syrah, checking the shallow cut on her arm and the bruises along her ribs. They were painful, but not deadly. "She needs food, water, and rest," Ethan said. "She'll be walking in a few days." Lyra's face softened, and for the first time that night, a true smile touched her lips. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved us both." Ethan didn't answer right away. He just started gathering the few supplies they had left, packing them neatly into his bag. They couldn't stay here. The Bonehand clan might return with reinforcements, and the dark canyons weren't safe even without raiders. The strange predator that had attacked earlier was proof enough of that. When Syrah was ready, Ethan helped her to her feet, supporting her weight with one arm while Lyra stayed close on the other side. The three of them began the slow walk toward the canyon's outer rim. The ground sloped upward, the walls opening little by little until slivers of starlit sky became wide stretches overhead. It felt like they had been in the darkness forever. And now, step by step, they were climbing back into the light. They reached a ridge just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The gold and pink glow spread across the alien sky, warming the cold rock beneath their feet. Lyra stopped, turning to look back at the canyon one last time. Her silver eyes were full of both fear and pride. "That place took so much from us," she said quietly. "But tonight, we took something back." Ethan didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said he understood. They continued walking until they reached a small trading outpost perched on the edge of the desert. It was little more than a cluster of stone huts and a single wide tent, but it was safe. The locals stared as they entered, their eyes following Sierra's unsteady steps and the human who supported her. Whispers passed between them, but no one spoke out loud. An older woman stepped forward, her skin weathered by sun and wind. She looked at Lyra and Sierra with surprise, then at Ethan. "You brought them back from the dark canyons?" she asked, her voice incredulous. Ethan just nodded. The woman shook her head slowly. "Few returned from there. Fewer still with their lives. The outpost gave them food, water, and a place to rest." Sierra lay on a bed of woven blankets, finally able to sleep deeply without fear. Lyra sat beside her for a long time, holding her sister's hand. Every so often, she would glance toward the door where Ethan stood, watching the sunrise. When she finally stepped outside, the morning air was cool and gentle. Ethan was tightening the straps on his pack. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice softer than before. He nodded. "You're safe here now," he said. "My work is done." Lyra bit her lip. Struggling to find the words, she took a step closer, looking up at him. "You could have walked away in the marketplace," she said. "Everyone else did. But you didn't." Ethan met her gaze, his expression calm but warm. "No one should have to fight alone," he replied. For a moment, they just stood there in silence, the wind moving between them. Then Lyra reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, jagged shard of glowing crystal she had used to blind the raider. She pressed it into Ethan's hand. "This is for you," she said, "so you'll remember the sisters you saved." Ethan closed his fingers around it, feeling the faint warmth of its glow. "I won't forget," he said. She smiled, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Will we ever see you again?" she asked. Ethan slung his pack over his shoulder. "If you ever need me," he said, "you know how to find me." He turned and began walking toward the horizon, his figure growing smaller against the rising sun. Lyra watched until he was just a dark shape in the distance. Then she whispered to herself, as if repeating a truth she now believed with all her heart. "Humans. They really are mighty." Back inside, Sarah stirred in her sleep, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Lyra sat beside her again, the morning light spilling across the room. The nightmare of the dark canyons was behind them, and the memory of the man who had stood against the Bone Hand clan would stay with them forever. Far away, Ethan walked on, the canyon long gone behind him, but the weight of its shadows still fresh in his mind. He didn't know where his path would lead next, but he knew one thing: when someone cried for help, he would always answer.